military families and the vital role that they play. Soldiers and their service counterparts remain engaged in operations and training events that test equipment and identify needed capabilities. Today, thousands of soldiers are deployed to the European continent in support of Ukraine and deterring expansion of Russian aggression. These missions validate the importance of pre-positioned stocks and the complexity of contested logistics. Operations in Ukraine demonstrate the criticality of competent combined arms operations for a ground force and the power of joint and coalition operations for a nation. As we begin work on the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, we recognize that the Army is operating with a largely flat budget. In this budget submission, the Army continues to prioritize its signature modernization efforts, slowing procurement of enduring capabilities. Reduced procurement quantities of capabilities critical to today's Army drive sometimes significant increases in cost per unit. The committee plays a crucial role in the oversight of these programs and would like to better understand how the Army is ensuring it makes best use of its resources with this strategy. The recently submitted classified National Defense Strategy sets out the Department of Defense strategic priorities and identifies the ways that the department will advance its goals. The NDS ranks China as the most consequential strategic competitor and the pacing challenge for the department. Russia remains an acute threat. Additionally, the department must manage persistent threats such as North Korea, Iran, and violent extremist organizations. We are interested in the specific investments and capabilities the Army included in its Fiscal Year 23 budget request that support implementation of the 2022 NDS. The Army continues its modernization effort across its 6 modernization priorities: long-range precision fires, next-gen combat vehicles, future vertical lift, the Army network, air and missile defense, soldier lethality, and its rapid capabilities development efforts in hypersonics, directed energy, indirect fire protection, and mid-range capability. We understand that 24 of the Army's priority efforts are set to be in soldiers' hands as fielded systems or prototypes by 2023. Successful introduction of these capabilities will be in part due to significant employment of digital design and digital prototyping. This practice helps to validate capabilities and refine requirements in advance of physical prototyping. Soldier-centered practices such as soldier touchpoint in the prototyping phase and try before you buy partnerships with industry improve functionality and soldier acceptability and make more rapid fielding possible. And I applaud the Army's progress in this area. A transformation of capability this significant will certainly trigger changes to Army structure, operating concepts, and postures in order to best meet the threat environment. We are interested to hear what changes the Army is considering. Additionally, we must understand the impact of these decisions on the modernization of the Army National Guard and Army Reserves, critical components of the total Army. Finally, I want to acknowledge the Army's recently published Organic Industrial Base Modernization Strategy. This plan would invest $16 billion over the next 15 years in facility modernization, with the mission to enable current material readiness, maintain surge capacity, and to support future weapons platforms for the Army and Joint Force. The organic industrial base remains critical to the Army's modernization strategy. We would like to better understand how the Army is nesting its material modernization efforts with this industrial base initiative. The Army continues to make bold steps in its effort to modernize, but hard decisions lie ahead. I have great confidence in you all and look forward to another productive year as we continue to field a world-class Army. Do we have time in for Senator Cotton by any chance? If not, we'll continue and let the witnesses provide their statements, and then I'll reserve time for the ranking member to give his remarks. I will start with... I'm glad it wasn't me. We will begin with Mr. Bush.
Chair Duckworth, thank you for that statement and your kind words about what our soldiers are doing every day overseas. That's a great reminder for all three of us that that's what we're here. That's what our job is, to actually get them equipment. So thank you for mentioning that. Thank you for the invitation today to appear before you to discuss the Army's modernization programs and resources requested in the President's budget for fiscal year 2023. I'm pleased to be joined today by my teammates, Lieutenant General James Richardson, Jim, from Army Futures Command, and Colonel Chris Grice from the Deputy Chief of Staff, G8. We appreciate your making our written statement a part of the record for today's hearing. Chair Duckworth, the Army continues to transform to provide the joint force with the land warfare capabilities needed to accomplish the missions of the Department of Defense. The Army's fiscal year 2023 budget can be described in two words: continuity and momentum. It maintains the readiness of the Army and establishes a sustainable path to transform to the Army of 2030. Our transformation requires a strategic pivot from 2 decades of counterinsurgency operations toward adaptation to meet our top-pacing challenge in China and the acute threat of Russian aggression, all while continuing to defend the homeland and be prepared for other missions around the world. As outlined in our written statement, we remain committed to our 6 modernization priorities: long-range precision fires, next-generation combat vehicles, future vertical lift, the network, air and missile defense, and soldier lethality. The Army's budget also continues modernization and procurement of our enduring platforms, albeit in some cases at reduced levels, as you noted, in aviation, ground combat systems, intelligence, logistics, and ammunition. Overall, I believe the budget request reflects an approach that prioritizes our most important modernization efforts. However, all budget proposals require making choices, and this one is no different. One of the questions asked of us in the hearing invitation was, quote, how the Army is managing risk while prioritizing future capability over enduring force modernization efforts. That is a critical issue, so let me address that briefly. As you are aware, in order to protect the Army's highest priority modernization efforts, the Army did reduce requested funding in other areas, specifically in the pace of modernization of our Armored Brigade combat teams. That decision was not made lightly. I'm confident that Army leaders understood the potential challenges of that approach. However, in doing so, the Army sought to ensure that we didn't go so low on any systems that we put the industrial base at risk to a degree that forecloses the ability of the Army to ramp back up someday if more funding becomes available. In short, we sought to ensure that we did not close off options for Army leaders or Congress to make adjustments to our plans in the future if they judge that's the right thing to do. That is a careful balance to strike, and I acknowledge we don't always get it exactly right. So I look forward to working with you and other senators on your views of where the Army landed on this issue. A second question asked in the hearing invitation was management of risk in the industrial base. There are 2 parts of that important issue I can address. First, the Army must monitor the privately owned industrial base, that base of suppliers and manufacturers owned by our industry partners. As I mentioned, one way we manage that risk is during the budget process, carefully analyzing the potential effects of the industrial base of any changes we're considering. That includes trying to ensure that we understand the downstream effects on 2nd and 3rd level suppliers. Often, what we see is less risk at the level of the largest companies, but greater risk as we look further down the supply chain. The second aspect of the industrial base is the organic industrial base you mentioned in your statement, the depots, arsenals, and ammunition facilities that are government-owned. In this case, the Army recently completed a new 15-year modernization plan that seeks to significantly upgrade our capabilities to match 21st century needs, prioritizing improved safety and expanded capacity within our current facilities. This plan also led to an historically high level of funding in the budget for upgrading these facilities across the board. For example, the Army is requesting more than $200 million in upgrades just for Waterfleet Arsenal in fiscal year 2023. That facility is one of the only places in America where gun tubes and cannons can be made, so it's a vital single point of failure in the supply chain that we have to protect. We also include, if you look across the FIDEP, about $500 million a year in upgrade efforts for the Army's ammunition plants. The Army is the single manager for conventional ammunition. That is primarily a joint responsibility because most of what we produce in energetics, for example, goes to the Navy and Air Force for their needs. That's an Army responsibility we take very seriously, and this budget invests more in that. I worked closely with General Daly at Army Materiel Command on this effort, and I think it's a well-done plan for improving the industrial base. A final issue I'd mention is the Army is trying to use all of the new acquisition authorities provided by Congress in recent years to make the Army's acquisition system more responsive to the needs of soldiers and to get equipment into their hands much more quickly than in the past. In particular, the use of the new urgent need pathway middle-tier acquisition pathway, and software acquisition pathway provide the Army with greatly expanded options to move faster. As an example, as you cited, many of the more than 24 systems the Army plans to field to soldiers in 2023 use those new authorities to move at accelerated timelines. While I know change in the DoD can be very slow, you should know that it can happen and that it's happening in the Army. The Army is changing and is committed to continuing this approach in the future with the support of members. As senators consider the fiscal year 23 legislation, I would ask you to be cautious about adding additional complications or additional elements of the acquisition system, as adding anything to the system that's already difficult to move quickly in can sometimes slow it down further. I am aware, however, that that is a balance and that oversight matters and taxpayer dollars must be protected, and the Army must use these authorities responsibly, and that's something I am committed to. In closing, I'd like to say thank you for the funding provided to support our many modernization efforts in recent years, and we believe that the fiscal year 2023 budget request builds on this progress we've made across all modernization priorities. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And at this time, I'd like to recognize the ranking member for any opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Duckworth, and thanks to the witness for your service. We appreciate your willingness to take on substantial challenges the Army faces. But I want to cut to the chase. The recently released defense strategy rightly highlights the accelerating threat of communist China and its unprecedented military modernization, and recognizes Russia remains an acute threat given its invasion of Ukraine. But the administration's budget request falls far short of providing the resources required to face these threats. The administration's budget not only doesn't keep pace with the rate of China's modernization, it doesn't even keep pace with our own inflation. Specifically for the Army, the administration request cuts the research and development budget by 6% and cuts Army procurement by 7% from the most recently enacted levels. Army leadership absorbed these cuts by dramatically slowing the modernization of critical enduring capabilities such as the Abrams tank that are the backbone of our armored brigade combat teams, deterring further Russian aggression in Europe at this very moment. Unfortunately, the substantial quantity reductions requested in this budget also drive up the per unit cost of these multi-million-dollar platforms somewhere between 15 and 40%. I suspect that Army leadership would not have taken this penny-wise and pound-foolish approach if they had been given an adequate top line by the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the Office of Management and Budget, or the White House. Unsurprisingly, therefore, the Army's unfunded priorities list seeks to restore $5.1 billion in critical requirements to mitigate the risk of the inadequate request for the Army. We have a lot of work to do to ensure that the Army receives the resources it needs to modernize for the threats we face. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the progress the Army is making on its highest modernization priorities, such as long-range precision fires, and on what we can do to overcome the challenges we are experiencing in replenishing advanced munitions transferred to Ukraine. Again, I thank Chairwoman Duckworth for calling the hearing, and I look forward to the testimony.
I thank the ranking member. General Richardson.
Chair Duckworth, Ranking Member Cotton, distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the teammates here at this end of the table and the soldiers and civilians of Army Futures Command, thank you for the opportunity to testify about Army modernization. Our country is engaged in strategic competition with determined adversaries. Part of that competition is the struggle among the militaries to out-innovate one another. Army Futures Command and our partners are on the front lines of that struggle. Innovation is about more than materiel. Armies win or lose by a combination of their doctrine, organization, and equipment. All three start with AFC. We develop concepts that become doctrine, design future organizations, and develop requirements for materiel, all based on assessments of the future operational environment, emerging threats, and technologies. The soldiers and civilians of AFC are making significant progress in each of these areas. AFC, working very closely with our ASALT partners, is supporting the delivery of 24 transformational systems into the hands of soldiers by 2023. based on the Army's 6 modernization priorities. Through soldier-centered design and strong support from FORSCOM, we're getting equipment into the hands of soldiers early so that we can inform requirements before significant investments are made. In FY21 alone, we conducted 113 soldier touchpoints. Looking ahead, we're seeking even more opportunities to integrate the lessons from the operational force, such as the continuing and collaboration of 18th Airborne Corps, 3 Corps, and I Corps. AFC leads Project Convergence, the Army's campaign of learning and experimentation, which informs requirements, concepts, and future force design. In Project Convergence 21, we learned that we must take a system of systems approach in developing our requirements documents. We also learned that we need to move from interoperability to integration of systems with the joint force and our allies. In Project Convergence 22, we will scale the technologies we're testing, integrate our allies and partners, and build on the lessons of Project Convergence 21. AFC is helping pave the way to a data-centric Army, fully integrated into a data-centric joint force. PC 21 taught us that data is the new ammunition, and the network is the center of gravity of the future fight. We're working to fully implement common data standards and joint message formats in our requirements documents to ensure a systems approach among the Army, Joint Force, and our allies and partners. Furthermore, we are moving the Army towards a future network that is transport agnostic, cyber resilient, and underpinned by a modernized security architecture. AFC is designing the Army of 2040 and supporting the delivery of the Army of 2030. We start by describing the future operational environment. Then, through our future studies programs, we bring together concept writers, intelligence professionals, and S&T experts to build our next concept, focused on how the Army of 24 will organize, equip, and fight. Stable and consistent funding from Congress supports our ability to serve our nation, take care of our people, and continue the momentum of our modernization efforts. Thank you for your consistent support of our Army and our families. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, General. And now, taking the place of General McCurry, Colonel Grice, thank you for stepping up.
Thank you, Chair Duckworth. And thank you, Chair Duckworth and Ranking Member Cotton and distinguished members of the Senate Armed Services Committee on Air, Land. On behalf of Lieutenant General Peterson, Brigadier General Mac McCurry, and the Headquarters Department of the Army Deputy Chief of Staff GA team, thank you for the invitation to appear before you to discuss Army modernization and the resources requested in the President's budget for fiscal year 2023. Our requested investments in modernization for FY23 reflect a deliberate, multi-year effort to accelerate focused modernization and place transformational capabilities in the hands of our soldiers. These capabilities support our national defense strategy for integrated deterrence, active campaigning, and help us build and maintain an enduring advantage over peers and potential adversaries. The Army's efforts contribute directly to the Joint Forces' ability to deter and, when called upon, fight and win decisively. Modernized capabilities reduce risk imposed by an increasingly aggressive competitors and foes to help us achieve decision dominance, range, and lethality that provide overmatch against any adversary. The Army remains committed to maintaining momentum for our modernization priorities while sustaining our enduring fleets. We continue to invest in upgrades to our enduring systems that will fight alongside our modernized capabilities. Through 4 years of prioritization, evaluation of capabilities, and difficult decisions on funding, we maintain that momentum to achieve a sustainable strategic path to the Army of 2030. We are grateful to Congress for the stable funding provided to support our modernization efforts, and with your sustained support, we will deliver advanced capabilities that enable the Joint Force to win in large-scale combat and multi-domain operations. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Bush, what Army modernization efforts are most critical to the Army fulfilling its roles as outlined in the NDS, and why?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think I'll start, and then if you allow, I'd let General Richardson add in a bit from Army Operations Concepts Requirement. I can tell you that the Secretary, given China as the pacing threat, is focused particularly on 3 areas: long-range fires, air and missile defense, and the network, all 3 of which we believe are foundational to anywhere the Army fights, but in particular, improving capabilities in those areas are vitally important for fulfilling the Army's role in a potential contingency with China.
Senator, I would echo that from Mr. Bush. Those 3 priorities are critical. We've been experimenting, and we have been also watching the news of what's going on in Ukraine, and Ukraine and the Soviet Union, and Russia have taught us a lesson. Number 1, that our modernization priorities are correct. Long-range precision fires is critical. And as I think all of you have been briefed on, we have 3 aspects of the long-range long-range precision fires that's on track to be delivered in FY23. That is the extended long-range cannon, PRISM, and our hypersonics missiles. So as it relates to the Army priorities and how it relates to what's going on in the world today, I do believe that we have our modernization priorities and they're on track.
Thank you. Mr. Bush, while the Army's fiscal year 23 budget request both maintains the readiness of the Army and maintains the modernization priorities of the Army of 2030, it does so with a largely flat budget. We've already mentioned this, and at the expense of enduring modernization, particularly those required for the Armored Brigade Combat Team modernization effort, as our ranking member has mentioned. How is the Army balancing risk in the current force to enable this prioritization?
Thank you, Senator. I think it's from an equipping standpoint alone. I think, as I mentioned, the first thing we look at is industrial base to make sure we don't go too low to where, should a contingency arise or more funding become available, those decisions can be reversed and we can pick things back up and move faster. So that's one way to mitigate risk. The second way is to be careful about and thoughtful about where we do add funding. Every year there's a tremendous amount of churn inside the Army just on new initiatives and new things being wanting to be funded. We took the process we just went through and the process we went through last year, exceedingly careful look at anybody wanting to add something new in order to protect funding where it resides. So a second way we mitigate risk. And the other one is the many other things that the U.S. Army brings to the fight, which is better leadership, better training, better logistics, which, while they can't overcome every equipment difference, can make a big difference in terms of the overall combat effectiveness of Army units, as General Richardson was mentioning.
Thank you. But let's get back to the equipment. Colonel Grice, how is the reduction of procurement quantities of modernization capabilities such as the Abrams, Bradleys, and Paladins impacting the cost per unit?
Chair Duckworth, we're managing that as we go through and develop our program each year. And for ABCT modernization, while we did take cuts, we're still achieving 7 modernized Set V3 tanks in this budget in 23 and 9 BCTs by FY27. As we looked at those reductions to focus on modernization, we analyzed those costs, analyzed the programmatic impacts, and made the best decision we could to continue to focus funding toward our modernization capabilities that have been discussed.
Secretary Bush.
Yes, ma'am. So one thing to keep in mind, it varies by contract type. So some things we're in a fixed price contract environment where the cost of the item is the cost of the item. In other cases, there is range pricing depending on the quantities the Army's orders, which, as you pointed out, if we're at the low end of that pricing range, the unit quantities are higher. We seek to mitigate that also by trying to spread out orders so it's a level set of orders, not going up and down with the defense industry so they can do their long lead parts ordering more efficiently. But there's no perfect solution to buying less sometimes does increase costs.
Okay. The Secretary of the Army describes the Army's role in the Pacific in part to sustain the joint force over vast distances by providing secure communications, establish intra-theater distribution networks, and maintaining munition stockpiles, as well as forward arming and refueling points. This all gets to the importance of contested logistics. Mr. Bush, how does the fiscal year 23 budget invest in Army logistics capabilities, and what lessons have we learned from operations in Europe?
So, Senator, I'll start. I can answer the budget question and then let General Richardson talk about Europe, if that's okay. So this budget does modestly increase funding for some areas of logistics. For example, tactical wheeled vehicles. If you look inside there, the JLTV program, for example, is up by about a third this year. That's progress. Some of our other truck lines are also up slightly, but you're right that overall there's a lot of level effort there. One area of increase is Watercraft Modernization. Pacific, in particular, the Army's relatively small but important watercraft fleet will be an important part of the joint logistics capability we provide. Modernization funding for that is up modestly in this budget request as well.
And Senator, as you mentioned, the Army has the specified role and Title X tasks to support not only the Army, but all of the other services as it relates to fuel, as it relates to ammunition, the distribution, and the protection of our lines of communication. Obviously, the number one priority within the Army is, from a contested logistics perspective, is to set the theater. And some of the things, and we're learning a lot. And you've been briefed on sensor to shooter. I label it now sensor to shooter to sustainer. And those are some of the lessons that we learned. The lessons that I've learned personally is we need to take a better look at our, you've seen what's happening in Ukraine. And the lesson that we took at AFC is we really have to take a look at our requirements documents and look at reliability. Because if you have a reliable weapon system, you don't need as many parts. You need to look from a requirements perspective as well. You need to look at fuel and the standards as well as maintainability. So that's one aspect that we've learned and applying it in our requirements documents today early on. The second aspect is predictive logistics. We've got to be able to predict when our systems are going to fail, put sensors on them, and have a common operating picture of when those systems. That will free up the supply lines. And then lastly, we have to have an understanding, a common operational picture from the battalion all the way to the enterprise level. So when we're shooting ammunition or using gas or need fuel, we have the same common operating picture at the battalion as you do back at the enterprise level. They're able to push that logistics forward. That was a large aspect that we learned from the Ukraine fight, and some of the things that we're applying today is where we're going to the future.
I just have concerns that this flat budget isn't going to allow us to meet some of these requirements. I'm going to recognize the ranking member for his questions.
I very much share your concerns. Mr. Bush, as I mentioned in my opening statement, this budget cuts research and development by 6%, procurement by 7% from the enacted FY22 amounts. Could you explain to me how the Army absorbed these actual reductions in such critical fields?
Senator, I can offer some thoughts there. First, I would, of course, point out that we're not the only part of the Army's budget in play. So the people part of the Army's budget and the training part are, of course, also things that sometimes take away from our accounts as all part of the trade-off.
I think we cut in-strength by 12,000, didn't we?
Yes, sir.
That's not good either. I know it's not your responsibility.
Sir, that's for members of the judge. I would say that those reductions to our accounts, I think a lot of good work goes into that. It doesn't make it easy. I think what you end up seeing, and you've identified it, is places where we couldn't ramp up production or we even had to go down, and we work through what those risks are. But those are never easy choices, sir.
Okay, let's turn to our munition stockpile. I find it very worrisome for the United States, for Ukraine, for Taiwan. Reports have indicated that we have sent one-fourth to one-third of our Javelin and Stinger stockpile to Ukraine, but we aren't capable of replenishing those systems at a reasonable rate. Mr. Bush, does our munitions industrial base provide the surge capacity that we would need for a protracted fight in Ukraine, in addition to satisfying our own needs and the need to defend Taiwan?
So, Senator, I think given enough time, the innovative American private sector industrial base combined with our organic industrial base can meet the needs. However, that would require funding to ramp up those aspects of those things so we can sustain those rates. Specific to your question, we have sent those munitions. The Army does have a plan to replenish those. We are, I can assure you, pushing on all doors and looking at every option to make that process go much faster than some of the timelines you've heard for preferred munitions.
Yeah, you had a phrase there at the beginning, which is a very important caveat, which is given the time. I'm afraid that Ukraine may not have the time. For that matter, Taiwan may not have the time. Some of the assessments I've heard of the time it would take to replenish these stockpiles are shockingly long. And even if they are off by a factor of 2 or 3 or 4, it still seems pretty long to produce not an aircraft carrier, not even a tank, but a missile that a private can carry and learn how to effectively employ in the span of an afternoon. Can you help us understand where the bottlenecks are in this system and what we can do as a committee to help accelerate the production?
Yes, sir. So a couple of things I would offer for members to consider. The first one is production timelines for advanced weapons, including ones that we make, like Stinger and Javelin, have often hovered in the 18 months to 30-month range for some time, only getting much faster than that when production rates are very high and the entire supply chain can feed it. However, we mitigate that risk by maintaining stockpiles, as you pointed out. We are now in this circumstance where we have provided some of that to a third party in Ukraine, and we are refilling our own stocks. But our munitions levels, sir, and we can provide all the numbers on every single item, I think you'll see a wide range. In many areas, we're still in good shape, even given what we've sent. In other areas, there are areas of concern, and happy to work with you on those. In terms of what the committee could do, one thing is advanced procurement. The Army doesn't use that very much. Other services do, which buys long lead parts 1 year ahead of when the end item is ordered. That is something that I believe we could possibly use in this case to shorten those timelines. So we could buy long lead items this year to support deliveries that would be put on contract next year. And that could compress things, sir, and that would require working with the committee on adjusting our budget request.
I think we should do that. Even 18 to 30 months, as you said. It's a conversation I've had with a lot of Arkansans, and I think most of them just find it astonishing that it takes our defense industrial base that long to produce such a relatively simple weapon. I mean, old-timers talk about how many ships and aircraft we were churning out at the height of World War II, and whether it's some of those bench stock items that you can use in advance if you procure them, or more time on running these lines. I'm sure all the workers would be happy with the overtime. We need to find solutions that produce these weapons at a much faster rate than I've seen assessed in classified settings. And I suspect most people on the committee would want to work with the department on that.
I like that idea. Senator Peters.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ranking Member Cotton, your talk about World War II and turning out war material, it reminds me of the Arsenal of Democracy in Detroit and the Willow Run facility that turned out several B-24 bombers every single day came off the assembly line, so it is something to be considered. Mr. Bush, the Army has made great progress in developing an open system architecture approach to ground vehicle autonomy software development, which, as you know, allows for collaboration with a wide range of industry-leading partners, both traditional and non-traditional. Last week, Secretary Wormuth released Army Directive 2022-07, which redefined the roles and responsibilities around Army modernization activities. The directive rescinds language from the previous Army directives establishing the Army Futures Command as, quote, the leading the modernization enterprise, end of quote, and states that the Army Science and Technology Laboratories now fall under the control of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, instead of the Army's Futures Command. So my question for you, Mr. Bush, is how do you anticipate that this new directive is going to support the transition of technologies out of our S&T laboratories, but particularly in key Army modernization areas such as robotics and automation.
Yes, sir. So one thing I'd offer is that the directive really didn't shift that much. It simply clarified lines of authority, most of which are set in statute in terms of which organizations do what in the Army. With regard to S&T labs in particular, one thing it did not change, and this is important, that those labs still fall under the operational day-to-day control of Army Futures Command. My role and my organization's role at the Army headquarters is to oversee that, provide oversight, guidance, and set policy. So it's a teamwork effort, sir, and I think that teamwork will continue unabated. To your specific question, one of my priorities as Assistant Secretary is to work with General Richardson and his team to formalize and improve our batting average, so to speak, on exactly what you said, which is transitions from S&T to programs of record. I brought in a new Deputy Assistant Secretary to help me do that, who actually came from Army Futures Command. So building those bridges between the organizations to make sure things work better is one of the things I'm committed to, sir.
Great. Thank you. General Richardson, as we approach the fielding of hypersonic missile batteries, I'm curious, how do you expect this new capability will impact the Army's overall artillery portfolio in the coming years? Do you expect these newly fielded capabilities will be an enduring complement to our current array of cannon and rocket artillery, or is some other some of our current arsenal in need of further modernization or divestiture?
Senator, thank you for the question. And as everyone in here realizes, long-range precision fires is our #1 priority in the United States Army. And it's really broken down by three aspects. One's at the tactical level, the operational level, and the strategic level. As we look to hypersonics being fielded in a battery in 23, it's going to provide a tremendous offensive capability that we have not had in the past. That combined, and we fight as a joint team, those fires combined with the other services give us greater lethality in any country we may face. As it relates to affecting programs within the operational aspect or the tactical aspect, it hasn't, sir, at this time, because LRPF is #1. We're on track with PRISM, fully funded, deliver a capability, a PRISM capability that far exceeds our ATACMS rounds today in FY23. And then we're very optimistic about the future for PRISM as it relates to distance and range and maneuverability. And so, truly, Senator, to answer your question, it does not have an impact. It complements what we're doing, and when we take what we're doing in all three aspects of long-range precision fires combined with the joint into the joint fight, it gives a capability that far exceeds any of our competitors.
Right. General Richardson, last week I asked Secretary Wormuth about the Army's plan regarding active protective systems to protect our cutting-edge platforms from relatively inexpensive threats that we're seeing from drones and anti-tank guided missiles. Given what we're witnessing right now in Ukraine, it seems like we would be wise to invest in technology in order to preserve the lives of our service members and also safeguard our multi-million-dollar platforms. So my question for you is, how do lessons learned from contemporary conflicts like what we're seeing in Ukraine get incorporated into both our current and future capability requirements?
Thank you, Senator. We were looking at this for the last couple of years and developed an active protection strategy. And what we're seeing is reinforcing our strategy as it relates to top-down attacks or the systems that are required. We have a number of ongoing S&T programs that are on track to be delivered in the short term to increase our survivability. What we've done is, you know, at GVSC it plays a large part in that active protection program, as well as the aviation aircraft survivability programs. A lot of these programs are top secret or SAP related, but the key thing behind active protection is bringing what we've learned in aviation, what we've learned in ground, bringing it together as a system that in the future will be very successful. And from a money perspective, from an ASOP perspective, timelines.
Yes, Senator. So we, first of all, partly because of Congress's urging, which was prescient, was the Army did procure sets of active protection systems, limited number of brigade sets for M1 Abrams tanks. What we're looking at now, and we're doing the R&D work now to understand, is when we can do that for Bradleys and Strykers. And I think the question for us in coming years will just be the ability, our pace of fielding to do that. I think the threat is clear. We've got a requirement. It's just how does it stack up against our many other needs? And then there's a question of how much do we put into active protection systems like Trophy versus passive protection technologies like better camouflage and electronic measures. And that's an ongoing conversation, sir.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Mr. Blumenthal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate your giving me the opportunity to ask some questions this afternoon, and thank you to the men who are here. Thank you for your service. I want to talk a little bit about the future of vertical lift. Very important to the Army and really to all of our services. The Army's future vertical lift program is, in effect, a pivotal modernization of all Army aviation, and it will affect all our services because the H-60 Blackhawk has been ubiquitous across the services. It has been the workhorse, the most dependable helicopter asset that we have for the Army, Navy, and Air Force over 4 decades, and its replacement, the future long-range assault aircraft, FLRAA, hopefully will deliver improvements in survivability, range, and lethality. I understand you can't talk about the FLRAA contract to be awarded. I understand probably sometime July, August, in that time frame. Maybe you can clarify that point as well. I hope that you'll provide the committee with your intentions about what the requirements of the contract will be. In my view, a lot of the most recent contracts, too many, have involved very large sustainment costs that are inadequately captured in the contract requirements. In other words, the cost of sustaining isn't adequately captured in the contracts. But I'm deeply concerned right now with some of the level of uncertainty between the Department and Congress about what platforms should be divested or stopped in order to invest in modernization, and most particularly the disruptions to our industrial base. You can't turn it on and turn it off like a light switch, as you well know. Let me give you an example. The Air Force's combat rescue helicopter. The budget calls for canceling the program after FY23 at 2/3 of the planned 113 helicopters. I fought for this program, and I believe it is absolutely necessary to assure that our aviators and everybody who flies can be rescued if they're down somewhere. And that's the reason why I work to recapitalize our aging Pavehawk fleet. It's been the cornerstone of combat search and rescue. Losing that assurance is devastating to our armed services, but it also is potentially a threat to our industrial supply base, which we need to keep in the fight until FLRAA is awarded. Again, not a light switch. You can turn it on and off, as I know from Sikorsky being in my home state of Connecticut with the most skilled industrial base of helicopter makers in the country, if I may say so. I would be interested in your assessment, Secretary Bush and General Richardson, in evaluating FLRAA proposals. What consideration should the Army give to the need to maintain and improve the Blackhawks, which are going to be essential for decades to come, and what can be done to assure the future capabilities of our defense industrial base?
Thank you, Senator. I can address a couple of your specifics there. First of all, for the FLRAA contract award, I believe September is probably a more likely timeline. But we can provide you with more details when we know the exact timing. Second thing, with regard to H60, this committee provided our multi-year authority for that multi-year. We still need Black Hawk aircraft, and we're going to keep producing them. That multi-year award, I just checked on it yesterday, actually, is now on track. Has to go through some hoops at the Office of Secretary of Defense, but we're on track and on time to make sure there's no disruption to the production work there. I think that will give us certainty for that 5-year multi-year period to make sure that that manufacturing capacity remains. The point you point at, sir, the risk area is the transition potentially from one platform to another. Always difficult, especially difficult with aircraft because of the advanced nature of that manufacturing and, of course, the very high standards we maintain. I can assure you that the Army is going to, in its plans, assure that we don't have some kind of gap. So any future transition to a different platform, there has to be overlap, essentially, to make sure that the industrial base and the suppliers, some of which will be the same, are still healthy and able to produce on schedule. If I could turn to General Richardson to talk briefly about how the Army is trying to reduce cost via better requirements for sustainment, if I could, sir.
Well, Senator, I agree with all your comments, and FLRAA and FARA are critical programs within our cross-functional teams. I'm an Army aviator, so I'm very familiar with that program. You talk about the Pavlo helicopter. I mean, I'm here today because of that the United States Air Force coming to get me when we were down. So it's an important aspect. The way we're doing this is different than the way we've done it in the past. We're flying before we buy. We're going out and prototyping. We're learning what's working. We have, aviators, crew chiefs, maintainers out with industry looking at these platforms, learning, providing feedback. It is helping inform us as the requirements generator for the aircraft. So we've learned a lot over the past couple of years. We're going to be flying a prototype here pretty shortly in 23 as it relates to FLRAA. It's about 85% built. It's being built and our soldiers are coming back to us and telling us, what needs to be changed. So it's extremely important. This is an extremely important program. It's a program that is required. We're still going to continue to need the UH-60 Blackhawk. We also have the Victor model that we're building, a great upgrade to the Blackhawk. But we'll have both of these programs for years to come. So the Blackhawk just won't go away in 2030, 2035. We'll have the Blackhawk for some time. We'll need to sustain the Blackhawk as we move the future vertical lift. But I think the path that we're on from an AFC perspective, learning, flying before we buy, is one that we need to continue, not only for that program, but for all of our programs.
Thank you. I appreciate those responses, and my time has expired, but I really appreciate an opportunity to talk with you further, get together at your convenience. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to follow up on Senator Blumenthal's question about future vertical lift and the future attack reconnaissance aircraft. When the Air Force developed the F-35, the A version, they decided not to put the F-35A through an op-eval program. As a former developmental test pilot, I still see the value in a thorough and comprehensive op-eval for any military aircraft, especially combat aircraft. General Richardson, can you tell us what your plans are for op-eval for the future attack reconnaissance airplane? You talked about bringing all this information back from the war fighters and have people go to the factory. but I'd like to find out what the current plans, because I heard that you may decide not to put the airframe through a full op eval.
Senator, thank you for the question, and I totally agree with you. We're on track with the future attack reconnaissance aircraft, and Mr. Bush can answer these questions, but I can assure you that from a test perspective and an operational evaluation, we're not cutting corners with our aircraft. We're going to have our testers there as it goes through the EMD, engine manufacturing, and as well as an operational assessment by Army aviators before it gets in the hands of our soldiers. Mr. Bush?
Yes, Senator, I mentioned it up front that the Army is trying to go faster with programs. However, one area that's not negotiable is testing, and especially any testing that relates to safety. Good. So that's a charge we have from the chief, and I take it very seriously. And I was here in Congress working with members on oversight of F-35. I remember that exact issue. And we're going to do a full-up test program to make sure this is the helicopter the Army needs.
Okay, not only safety, but operational effectiveness, the ability for it to do its job in a combat environment. Just got a couple more minutes here. I want to follow up on a question about the Apache. So I was out in Phoenix, might have been about 10 months ago now, and I got the opportunity to fly the latest version of the Apache. Some things I really loved about it. There were a couple issues, but it is a great and very effective airframe, and it's been, I think it's the greatest combat helicopter that's ever been built. And the Army has identified the Apache as the #1 enduring aircraft for upgrades, but I'm only seeing about $10 million for Apache mods over the next couple of years, and it doesn't seem like there's anything beyond that. How can the Army realistically maintain global attack, helicopter dominance for the next few decades without continuing to invest in the Apache program?
Senator, I'll have to check on that exact number you just cited because that sounds very low given the importance of that program to the Army. However, I can assure you that, like Blackhawk, we got authority for a new multi-year for Apache from this committee in Congress last year. Greatly appreciated. We are on track to award that multi-year contract, which will provide 5 more years of production. Along with that should be constant upgrade programs, both in the production program, but also just the normal mods we do to address ongoing issues as the aircraft matures and just goes through its paces. So I think if you look at the Army's budget broadly, there is still a very strong commitment to Apache, since it is still, as you cited, the world's greatest attack helicopter. If I could have General Richardson add anything you want to.
Senator, I would just echo it is the greatest attack helicopter in the world, and I've flown that for 30 years.
All right.
And when we look at, from an Army Futures Command perspective, when we look at the Army of 2030 and the Army of 2040 that we're looking at today, the A-64 aircraft is a major aspect of our operational concept and how we're going to fight in the future. So I see the Apache sticking around for a while because the future attack reconnaissance aircraft is really our scout aircraft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And working together as a team will dominate the forces and our competitors in the future.
All right, I've got one observation from my 1-hour flight time in it. The targeting system with the monocular. I think we could upgrade that and make it a little bit more capable. And I'll yield back.
I agree, sir.
I got to represent for the assault pilots, man. Let me just say that there might be a critical mass of people in this room who've sat on the ground waiting to be picked up by an by a utility helicopter. Would that be true, Senator Cotton? Yeah. How many people here sat on the ground? Sergeant Major, have you waited to be picked up by a? Yeah. Okay. Just. We're going to do a second round of questions. The vote has been called. I will ask my questions. I will hand it over to the ranking member, who will then close us out after he is done with his questions, if no one else comes. I want to go back to the organic industrial base. This year, the Army published a 15-year, 3-phase, $16 billion modernization strategy. This effort refines the Army's priorities and focuses on modernization efforts most critical to supporting current readiness. If implemented and resourced as planned, it will ensure the Army has the manufacturing and production capabilities to meet current and future requirements, including its significant modernization efforts. My question, Mr. Bush, is that what are your thoughts on how to maintain capacity and expertise? That is the critical part, the expertise part, during this significant reduction between periods of contingency operations or robust manufacturing investments, because that expertise is really easy to lose and really hard to get back.
Yes, Senator, thank you. I think the best way to keep expertise is to keep them busy doing what they're best at. So that means providing meaningful, critical work for the organic industrial base to do, both the depots but also the arsenals, to ensure that that workforce we can maintain it. So when we make decisions on where we're going to do work, it's something I'm always conscious of in terms of make or buy decisions. One thing I think we could consider, and Senator Cotton's question regarding how do you balance risk during with the industrial base, is the entire organic industrial base is essentially an insurance policy. We maintain that in case of a short notice contingency, in case there's something the private sector doesn't do. That is why we have the organic industrial base. It's an insurance policy. We could increase the capacity of that as one way to mitigate long-term risk, both in terms of the size and amount of activity it does. The modernization plan, as you pointed out, ma'am, really modernizes what we have. I think there's a big policy question about the size of it and the size of that workforce, which won't be inexpensive to maintain, but in certain contingencies proves absolutely vital to have in short-term, with a short-term notice for a large Army fight.
Well, so let's get into that. I mean, the Army submitted $5.1 billion in unfunded requirements. Within that, the Army made a decision to prioritize future capabilities at the expense of ongoing modernization efforts of enduring capabilities, leaving about just under $2.5 billion, right? $2.4 billion for modernization and equipping in unfunded requirements. I mean, what are the top modernization projects included in this list? And then how are you ensuring enduring capabilities receive sufficient priority to support deterrence or, if necessary, emergent requirements? And then you can address how these decisions impact the National Guard and Army Reserves as well.
So, Senator, I'll start and then turn to the team here for some help with the expertise here. So the first part of that question is if you just look at the Army Chief of Staff's unfunded priority list, it is numbered, it is in order. My personal opinion in terms of modernization things, if you look on there are ads for additional SHORAD capability. So we're rebuilding our entire air defense SHORAD capability almost from scratch. Those additional ads would be very much in my mind for members to consider. But also the Abrams production numbers that are in there also would be a helpful risk mitigator. But also there's one critical research and development line, and that has to do with the missile that comes after Stinger. That R&D would help us accelerate that program to ensure we don't have a gap between current Stinger production and future missiles. So those would be my top three, ma'am.
Enduring capabilities for emergent threats.
Yes, ma'am.
And deterrence.
I think the budget does strike a balance, and I think we do maintain enough enduring capability, production capacity, and industrial base. That doesn't make it easy for our companies who are doing those projects, but we did really carefully try to strike that balance. If members, in gathering information, identify places we got it wrong, I'm happy to work with you and your staff on that to make sure we get it right by the time we're done with this process, ma'am. Guard and Reserve, overall, I can just tell you that attention to Guard and Reserve needs, now that I've seen this process from the inside, is they are fully integrated in our budget, my part of the budget design effort, and they're in the room for everything. And we pay constant attention to make sure that that's covered and then their needs are fulfilled. Aviation in particular, I think the Chief has informed all of us to make sure we keep the Guard completely integrated and a part of our plans, and that they are seeing everything and they are comfortable with what we're doing. General Richardson.
Senator, I'd like to speak to the Guard. The Guard is tied into everything that Army Futures Command is doing. I have over 20 National Guard representatives that work full-time in Army Futures Command as we look toward the future. And so whether it's aviation, air and missile defense, we work together as a team in describing the future, the requirements, and we work with Mr. Bush and our senior leaders of where these items should be fielded. We make our recommendations. As it relates to the Chief's unfunded requirements. Mr. Bush is correct. MSHORAD is an unfunded requirement, and he has 3 entries within that. MSHORAD, from an idea until we fielded it, ma'am, was 3 years. And we fielded a platoon in Europe. We have a directive requirement for 4 battalions of MSHORAD in the United States Army. That UFR helps us buy those 4 battalions. The second part of the UFR is the increment. The missile on the MSHORAD is the Stinger. And so we have different increments. Number 1, to buy more Stinger. Number 2, to fulfill the obsolescence issues that we were having for the Stinger. And I just signed a new requirements document for an upgraded Stinger, which is also a part of it. So, ma'am, to answer your question, MSHORAD at the top, a CFT program under air and missile defense, and I think the chief got it right.
General Richardson, the Secretary issued a directive last week about Army Futures Command. It appeared to remove a lot of the command's acquisition authorities. Could you explain to me more about that directive?
Yes, Senator. I received the memo, and I worked personally with the Undersecretary of the Army on the memo. And I will tell you that modernization is a team sport. And a lot of people focus on the material aspect. But when you look across the team, our job is to deliver concepts. Our job is to deliver organizations, the design of those organizations. So there's more to it than just materiel. I spend a majority of my time on the future organizations and experimentation. The day-to-day work at AFC is not changing. If you really read the memo, AFC is the engine for Army modernization, and we're the command that executes Army modernization for the United States Army. We spoke earlier about science and technology. Actually, it gave me greater capability. Now I have all the laboratories in the Army under Army Futures Command, where I only had 1 command. So now I have to integrate and synchronize across 5 different S&T commands. But we do this as a team. Every day we're with Mr. Bush's people. They provide oversight. We develop a POM together. We develop the strategy, the S&T strategy together. So is it, from an Army Futures Command perspective, we didn't lose any authority in that memorandum. I think it just clarified some of the roles that are already provided in law.
Mr. Bush, do you have anything to add?
Senator, I would emphasize the teamwork part. Sorry, Senator, I would emphasize the teamwork part. The Army's a big place. No one command, even if charged, could possibly do all of Army modernization. So I think the Secretary wanted to lay out the many different components beyond even what you see here at the table. I mentioned General Daly at Army Materiel Command, a vital part of Army modernization. Acquisition authority is in Title 10 assigned to the Civilian Secretariat and then to me from the Secretary. So I didn't really move. It was just, the Secretary was just trying to clarify to make sure everyone had her guidance on how she wants things to work. And her biggest charge to me is to emphasize the teamwork aspect, and everybody has to work together, and I think that's what's taking place.
So I appreciate all those points. What was the problem she was trying to solve? Seems to me that Futures Command has been pretty successful since it stood up on rapidly fielding a lot of different systems. So what was the problem this was trying to solve?
Yes, sir. So I believe the key issue was she was making sure it was absolutely clear that ultimate acquisition authority resides in the civilian chain of command by law. That was it, sir. And my observation since I arrived a year ago is that there hasn't been a problem there per se day to day. I think she just wanted to codify how things have been working certainly since I arrived, which I believe has been in line with the law.
Okay, I'm going to have to go vote. Thank y'all. One more thing. Are y'all going to name these things? I mean, you're getting close to the extended range cannon artillery.
Sir, I'm
You're not going to make a private shoot something called the URCA, are you?
No, sir, and I have ideas on all those. And actually, my goal is at AUSA, after I coordinate across the entire Army, to roll out a bunch of new names for things so we have things, as you've pointed out, that soldiers can be proud of. from ground vehicles to air defense vehicles to cannon systems. The Army traditionally waits a long time to assign names, but that's an Army choice. We could name things earlier to make sure that members become familiar with them. The other services do it. We could do it as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. Appreciate it.